My name is Denise, and I'm 57 years old. I spent over 3 decades as a schoolteacher before finally retiring to the quiet hills of Vermont. After my husband, Warren, passed away 4 years ago, I found peace in our old family cabin, the same one we'd built together in our younger years. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. The kind of place where the air feels thick with pine and memories. My days were slow, predictable, and beautifully uneventful. I'd wake up early, brew my coffee, read by the window, and take long walks through the trails Warren used to clear for me. Solitude became my comfort, but as life often does, it had other plans. My daughter Ella got married last spring. She's 29, bright, and too kind for her own good. Her new husband, Trent, seemed like a perfect match at first glance, tall, charming, well-spoken. The kind of man who always said the right things and smiled with perfect timing. I wanted to believe she'd found the happiness I'd always wished for her. A few months after their wedding, Ella called me one evening, her voice soft and careful, like she was walking on eggshells. She told me they were having some trouble finding a place to live, and Trent had suggested they stay at the cabin for a little while until they saved enough for a down payment. Of course, I said yes. How could I say no to my only daughter? When they first arrived, I actually enjoyed the company. It was nice hearing laughter in the house again. Ella helped me cook, and Trent even fixed the old porch railing that had been creaking for years. For a while, I thought this arrangement might even heal the quiet ache that lingered since Warren's passing. But slowly, things began to shift. It started small. Trent began making subtle comments about upgrading certain things in the cabin. "We should replace these old curtains," he'd say casually. Or, "It'd be better if the living room faced the mountain view." He spoke like it already belonged to him. I told myself it was harmless, but the tone behind those words made me uneasy. One morning, I woke up to find he had rearranged all the furniture. My recliner, the one Warren used to sit in, was moved near the door, and my bookshelf had been emptied and stacked against the wall. When I asked why, he smiled and said, "Just making space for the future. We need more room once my parents get here." I froze. I thought I'd misheard him. "Your parents?" I asked. He nodded as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Yeah, they've been wanting to move out of the city for a while. I figured this cabin would be perfect for all of us." I remember glancing at Ella, hoping she'd correct him, but she didn't. She looked down, her hands folded in her lap. That silence spoke louder than any protest could have. I tried to stay calm. "Trent, this is my home. I didn't agree to," he interrupted with that smooth, practiced tone of his. "Denise, we're family now. Families share, right?" Something about that word share made my stomach twist. He wasn't asking for space, he was claiming ownership. Over the next few days, he started referring to the cabin as our place. He'd invite his friends over for barbecues, rearrange my kitchen shelves, even changed the Wi-Fi password for security reasons. Ella apologized constantly, but her words felt hollow. She was stuck between loyalty to her husband and love for me. I could see it tearing her apart. Every night, after they went to bed, I'd sit in the living room alone, staring at the walls Warren had built with his hands. I whispered to him sometimes, telling him I was trying to keep our home safe even though I didn't yet know how. I wanted to believe this would blow over, that Trent's obsession with control would fade once they found their own place. But each day, his confidence grew. He began acting like a landlord, not a guest. He talked about installing new locks, painting the walls, even removing the old wooden sign that said, "Den and Warren's Haven." That sign had hung above the porch for 20 years. It was the heart of the place. When I told him it stayed, he laughed and said, "Well, maybe we can make a new one, something that represents all of us." That night, I sat by the fireplace with a notebook in my lap, my mind racing. I wasn't just frustrated, I was frightened. Frightened that this man who married my daughter was slowly taking over everything I loved. And the worst part was, Ella was too afraid to stop him. I thought of all the lessons I'd taught my students over the years about standing up for yourself, about protecting what matters, and I realized I hadn't taken my own advice in a long time. That was the moment I decided, if he was bringing his parents into my home, I needed a plan of my own. Trent began acting like the cabin was already his. At first, it was little things, small gestures that might have seemed considerate to anyone else. He'd open the door for me, carry groceries from the car, and offer to help organize the kitchen. But the help always came with strings. He'd rearrange everything to his liking, shifting things around like he was optimizing his own territory. My kitchen cabinets, once neatly labeled with spices and preserves, were suddenly filled with his protein powders and meal prep containers. I'd reach for flour and find it replaced by something called muscle fuel. He'd grin and say, "You'll love it once you get used to it." The changes didn't stop there. I came home one afternoon after visiting a friend in town to find my living room completely transformed. My floral couch had been moved to the guest room, replaced by a sleek gray sectional I'd never seen before. When I asked where it came from, he said, "Ordered it this morning. We needed something modern." "You're welcome." I stood there, stunned, unable to speak. My own home was starting to look like a showroom for his ego. Ella noticed it too. I could tell by the way her smile faltered every time he made a decision. She'd whisper to me at night when he was asleep, "Mom, I didn't know he was going to change so much after marriage. I thought he was just confident." Confident. That was one word for it. I told her to be patient, that maybe once they moved out, things would settle. But deep down, I knew something darker was brewing. The day I realized just how far things had gone was when Trent decided to change the Wi-Fi password. I only discovered it because my tablet wouldn't connect. When I asked him for it, he said, "Don't worry about it, I'll take care of the tech stuff. It's my Wi-Fi," I reminded him. He laughed a dry, mocking sound. "Technically, it's our Wi-Fi now, right?" Every word felt like a small invasion. He'd found a way to assert ownership in the smallest details: language, tone, space. I wasn't just losing my home, I was being erased from it. I tried confronting him one evening. I waited until Ella was out running errands so it'd just be the two of us. "Trent," I said carefully, "I need to set some boundaries. This is my home. You and Ella are guests here. I've been patient, but..." He cut me off with that infuriating smirk. "Denise, relax. You're overthinking it. We're family. Families share." He said it with such conviction, like I was the one being unreasonable for wanting to keep my own house under my own control. After that, things got worse. He began inviting his friends over on weekends for loud barbecues, leaving empty beer bottles scattered across the porch and cigarette butts near the garden I'd tended for years. When I asked them to clean up, one of his friends chuckled and said, "You sound just like Trent's mom." That night, I cried quietly in my room, wondering how I'd let things reach this point. I started documenting the changes, taking photos, writing notes. It wasn't about paranoia. It was about proof. Something inside me told me I might need it later. I also began locking certain drawers, especially the one that held Warren's old letters and our deed paperwork. I noticed Trent snooping around that area once, claiming he was looking for batteries. Ella's apologies became daily occurrences. "He's just trying to help," she'd whisper, her voice trembling. But I could see the fear behind her eyes. She was trying to keep the peace, and I couldn't blame her. Love can make people blind, and fear can make them silent. At dinner one night, he made another announcement, casual as ever. "Mom and Dad are thinking of moving sooner, maybe next month. Isn't that great? The more, the merrier." I nearly dropped my fork. My hands shook as I set it down. "Trent," I said slowly, "this cabin isn't big enough for all of us." He chuckled, waving his hand dismissively. "We'll make it work. Maybe you can take the smaller bedroom upstairs. I know the stairs are a lot for you anyway." The way he said it, condescending and sweet all at once, made my skin crawl. After dinner, I sat on the porch, staring out at the fading sunset. The woods felt different now. The peace I'd once found in their stillness had turned into unease. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a warning. My late husband used to say, "Protect your peace, Denise. No matter who threatens it." Those words echoed in my mind that night, louder than the crickets or the wind. That's when I realized I was done waiting for him to change. He wouldn't stop until I had nothing left. He didn't want to share my home, he wanted to own it. And if I didn't do something soon, he'd succeed. I went inside, locked my bedroom door, and pulled out a notepad. My hand trembled as I began to write not a letter, not a complaint, but an idea. Something practical. Something quiet. I didn't know what it would become yet, but it started with one thought. If he wanted to take my space, I'd make sure there was a part of it he'd never touch. And that's when I decided to protect my peace in the most unexpected way possible. It started with a dream about my late husband whispering, "Hide what's yours." I can still see it vividly, Warren standing by the old oak tree behind the cabin. His favorite spot to sit and carve little wooden birds. In the dream, he wasn't smiling. He just looked at me, his eyes steady, voice calm but certain. "Hide what's yours, Denise. Don't let them take it." When I woke up that morning, there was this strange stillness in the air, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for me to act. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. The cabin had always been full of secrets, old storage spaces, trapdoors from when Warren built it himself. He used to joke that if we ever got snowed in, we'd still have a way to hide from the world. I never thought much about it until now. That morning, I poured myself a strong cup of coffee, pulled out my old sketch pad, and started drawing. I wasn't an architect, but 30 years of grading geometry homework had given me some sense of proportion. I remembered the crawl space behind the laundry room, a dusty, forgotten little chamber Warren used for storing tools and paint cans. It was narrow but deep, almost 6 feet of hidden space between the walls. My mind began to race. With the right materials, that empty void could become something useful, something invisible. I spent the rest of the day taking measurements while Ella and Trent were out running errands. Every time I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel road, my heart skipped, terrified they'd come back early and see what I was doing. But they didn't. I had hours to myself, just me, and the quiet hum of my plan forming piece by piece. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop imagining it, a room no one else knew existed. Somewhere I could retreat, store my things, and, if needed, disappear entirely. The thought wasn't just comforting, it was empowering. For the first time in months, I felt in control again. Over the next week, I began collecting supplies discreetly. I told Ella I was finally renovating the laundry area, something I'd mentioned doing for years, so it didn't raise suspicion. Trent didn't care much about that part of the house. He said it was too small to bother improving. That was perfect. His disinterest gave me space to work. I researched everything: hidden rooms, soundproofing, insulation techniques, even covert door mechanisms. There were whole forums dedicated to secret architecture. I read them all. Some people built panic rooms for safety, others for privacy. But mine? Mine would be for strategy. Every decision I made had purpose. I envisioned the door blending seamlessly with the wall, disguised behind the dryer. Inside, it would be big enough for me to move comfortably, maybe 8 by 10 feet. Just enough to hold a small cot, a storage cabinet, and my most valuable possessions. And I wasn't just thinking about jewelry or documents. I wanted to protect the memories too. Warren's letters, our wedding photos, his old watch. Things Trent would never value but meant everything to me. It was strange, realizing how easily my maternal warmth had turned into calculated focus. But every time I doubted myself, I'd picture Trent's smirk, his voice saying, "Families share." That single phrase fueled every nail I imagined hammering, every panel I planned to seal. When I shared the renovation idea with Ella, she smiled weakly. "That sounds nice, Mom. It might help take your mind off things." She didn't ask for details, maybe because she was too tired to deal with another argument between Trent and me. I could tell she was slipping further into submission, losing little pieces of herself each day. It made me angry, but it also made me determined. If I couldn't protect her from her husband yet, I could at least protect the one thing I still had left: my home. Late one night, I walked quietly through the cabin, running my hand along the walls Warren had built decades ago. I whispered, I'm going to fix this, Warren. I promise. The house creaked in reply, like it understood. I made a list of what I'd need: plywood, drywall, insulation, soundproof panels, lighting. It was a lot, but I wasn't rushing. This had to be done quietly, perfectly, and in secret. By the end of the week, I'd contacted a local handyman named Victor. He was a retired builder, one of Warren's old fishing buddies. He owed me a favor from years back when I helped his daughter with her college applications. I told him I needed a small private workspace built behind the laundry room, nothing major. He didn't ask too many questions, which was exactly what I needed. When he came by to inspect the area, he whistled low and said, "This could work, Denise. You'll have to trust me to keep it between us." I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. I wouldn't be asking if I didn't. After he left, I stood in front of the laundry room door, staring at the blank white wall where my secret would soon live. My plan wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was about survival. About keeping something sacred untouched by people who didn't respect it. For the first time in months, I slept soundly that night. I dreamt of Warren again, only this time, he was smiling. It felt like his quiet way of saying I was on the right path. I didn't realize it yet, but this secret room would become my most powerful weapon. I started construction while pretending to renovate the laundry area. That was my cover story: simple, believable, and unthreatening. After all, Trent didn't care much about chores or laundry. The only time he went near that room was to dump his dirty clothes on the floor. It was the perfect blind spot in the house, the one corner he'd never look twice at. I told Ella that the washer had been acting up and I'd hired someone to fix the plumbing behind it. She barely looked up from her phone and said, "That's great, Mom." Her tone was tired, distant, as if all the life had been drained from her since she married him. Victor came early the next morning, just after sunrise. He parked his old truck at the bottom of the hill to avoid drawing attention. I met him outside, carrying a thermos of coffee and the quiet weight of my plan. "You sure about this?" he asked. His voice was rough, like gravel scraping metal. "Once we start, there's no unseeing what we're building." I nodded without hesitation. "I'm sure." We entered through the back door and went straight to work. He brought plywood sheets, insulation, tools, and soundproofing panels, everything I'd requested. The first step was clearing the crawl space. Years of dust and forgotten tools filled the air with a musty smell. It was hard work, but I didn't mind. Every bucket of dirt I hauled out felt like reclaiming a piece of my sanity. Victor measured the wall behind the dryer carefully, tapping the wooden frame. "You've got enough space for something decent," he murmured. "Maybe 8 by 10 feet if we push the insulation a bit." That was more than I'd hoped for. By noon, we had outlined the hidden doorway. I insisted it be completely seamless, no visible hinges, no frame, nothing that could hint at its existence. The entry would be disguised as part of the wall paneling, covered by the dryer and a set of hanging linens. From the outside, it would look like an ordinary laundry nook. From the inside, it would be my sanctuary. While Victor worked, I played my role perfectly. Whenever Trent came home early, I'd greet him, cheerfully, claiming we were fixing the dryer ventilation. He barely paid attention, only nodding and asking if dinner was ready. His arrogance was my best camouflage. Over the next several days, the project began to take shape. The framework went up first solid, hidden behind the drywall. Then came the insulation. Victor suggested we add acoustic panels to deaden the sound, so even if someone knocked on the wall, it would seem solid. The thought of that someone searching, unaware of what was inches away, sent a strange chill through me. I helped him install a small air vent connected to the main duct so the space wouldn't suffocate. We also added a low LED strip light that could be switched on quietly. It was surreal watching this hidden world form inside my own home. While Victor installed the final panels, I gathered things to place inside: a small bedroll, canned food, bottled water, a first aid kit, flashlights, a radio, and a copy of Warren's journal. It wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. That journal had always reminded me that Warren believed in preparation, not paranoia. I also added a small safe, nothing too big, just enough to store jewelry, important papers, and a USB drive where I planned to back up photos and documents. I wasn't entirely sure why I felt compelled to prepare for the worst, but experience had taught me that evil rarely announced itself before it acted. One afternoon, as Victor finished the final coat of paint on the wall, Ella walked in unexpectedly. My heart nearly stopped. I'd told her to be out shopping with Trent, but she must have come home early. She looked at Victor, then at me, and frowned. "Mom, what's all this?" I forced a smile, my heart racing. "Just a small upgrade, sweetheart. The walls had some mold damage behind the dryer. Victor's helping me fix it before it spreads." She seemed unconvinced for a moment but eventually sighed. "I guess that makes sense. Trent's allergic to mold, you know." I nodded, biting back the urge to say something cruel. Once she left, Victor exhaled. "That was close." I nodded, staring at the wall that now looked completely ordinary, smooth, unmarked, and utterly deceptive. It was perfect. By the end of the week, the room was finished. The final step was installing a secret lock system. Victor wired a small magnetic latch that could be controlled from both sides, a simple switch hidden behind the dryer. It clicked softly when engaged, nearly inaudible. I tested it twice. It worked flawlessly. When he was done, Victor wiped his hands on his jeans and looked at me. "Denise, I've built a lot of things in my life, but I've never seen someone so determined to keep something safe." I smiled faintly. "I'm not keeping something safe, Victor. I'm keeping someone out." He nodded, then promised to stay silent about the project. When he left, I locked the door behind him, then stood in front of the laundry wall, my heart thudding. I reached behind the dryer, pressed the hidden latch, and felt the panel loosen under my hand. Slowly, I stepped inside. The air inside was cool and still. The faint hum of the cabin's ventilation system echoed softly. I looked around at the bare wooden walls, the little cot, the safe, the small lamp casting a warm circle of light, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control, power, safety. For the first time, the cabin felt like mine again, even if only within these secret walls. I ran my fingers along the smooth surface of the door before sealing it shut from the inside. The sound of it clicking closed felt final, like punctuation at the end of a sentence I'd been too afraid to write. I sat on the cot, breathing deeply, feeling the quiet press in from all sides. I had created something invisible, something only I knew existed, and that made it sacred. When I stepped inside the finished room for the first time, I realized I had built more than a hideout. I had built control. The day they arrived, the cabin no longer felt like mine. It was a gray morning in early spring, the kind where fog clings to the treetops, and the air smells like damp soil. I was in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread, when I heard tires crunching up the gravel driveway. I looked out the window and saw a sleek silver SUV rolling to a stop beside the cabin. My stomach tightened before I even saw who stepped out. Trent climbed out first, looking smug and excited. Then came a woman with short, stiff curls and a frown that seemed permanently etched into her face. Her pearl earrings glinted in the cloudy light. Behind her was a tall, thin man with a posture too straight to be friendly. They were carrying matching suitcases. Martha and Dean, Trent's parents. Trent swung the door open without knocking. "Surprise!" he said, grinning like a kid showing off a prize. "Mom, Dad, this is Denise. Welcome to our home." The words echoed through my chest like a slap. Martha extended her hand with the kind of politeness that doesn't hide judgment. "Oh, what a cozy little place," she said, glancing around with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Smaller than I imagined, but quaint." Dean nodded, giving a low whistle. "Could use some upgrades, though. Maybe brighter lighting, something more modern." Ella appeared from the hallway, her face pale. "Mom, I tried to tell him to wait," she whispered quickly. I could see how tense she was, her shoulders drawn tight, her eyes darting between me and Trent like she was waiting for a storm. I forced a smile. "Welcome," I said evenly, though it felt like the word lodged in my throat. "I didn't realize you were coming today." "Oh, Trent didn't tell you?" Martha asked sweetly, turning toward her son. "He said you were so excited to have us move in early." My fingers tightened around the dish towel I was holding. "Move in?" I repeated slowly. Trent chuckled, waving a hand as if it were no big deal. They sold their condo faster than expected, and it'd be silly for them to waste money on a hotel. There's plenty of space here. Plenty of space? This was a 2-bedroom cabin. Ella opened her mouth to speak, but Trent shot her a look, the kind of silent command that froze her instantly. She fell quiet. That night, I listened to the sound of new voices filling the house that had once held only peace. The kitchen, where I used to hum softly while cooking, now echoed with Martha's criticisms. This pan's too old to cook evenly. Do you always use this much butter? Dean, meanwhile, treated my living room recliner like it was his personal throne. Now this, he said with a grin, is a good chair. Every part of the cabin was under siege. By the second day, they were unpacking boxes in the hallway. Martha spread out her floral tablecloth over my dining table. It brightens the space, she said with a satisfied nod. Dean moved his tools into the shed beside Warren's old fishing gear. I stood there, numb, while they overtook everything that mattered to me. Trent acted as though nothing was wrong. They'll get settled soon, he said, patting my shoulder. It's just an adjustment period. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like this invasion was a kind gesture. At night, I could hear them talking through the thin walls. Martha's sharp voice, Dean's low chuckle, and Trent's laughter blending with theirs. They talked about redecorating, repainting, even extending the deck. We could open this place up, make it more family-friendly, Dean said once. Wouldn't that be great, Trent? Every word was another nail in the coffin of the life I'd built here. I spent most of my days outside, tending to the garden or pretending to fix things on the porch just to escape their presence. Whenever I passed by the laundry room, I'd glance at the blank wall, my secret, and feel a small rush of comfort. It was like having a pulse beneath the house that only I could feel. Ella was fading before my eyes. She barely spoke anymore, always busy keeping her husband and in-laws happy. When she did look at me, her eyes were full of apology, the kind that comes from guilt, not choice. One evening, while I was setting the table for dinner, Martha reached over and moved the plates. We like them closer together, she said. Feels more intimate that way. That was the moment I realized there wasn't an inch of my home left untouched by them. Every room carried their scent, their sound, their control. The cabin, the sacred space Warren and I built with our hands and love, had become theirs in less than a week. But they didn't know about the room. The room they could never touch, never invade, never even imagine existed. It was the one piece of the cabin that still belonged entirely to me. After everyone went to bed that night, I slipped quietly into the laundry room. The faint hum of the dryer masked the click of the hidden latch. I opened the door and stepped inside the dimly lit space. The air was cool and still, exactly as I'd left it. I sat on the cot, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter drifting faintly through the walls. In that silence, a strange calm settled over me. Let them think they'd taken over. Let them fill the cabin with their arrogance and noise. They could have the surface, but I owned the heart of this place. And one day soon, they'd realize that. But what they didn't know was that I had already created the one space they'd never find. It wasn't long before the tension became unbearable. What had started as mild irritation soon grew into daily conflict, quiet, suffocating battles fought through passive comments and invasive actions. Martha and Dean had officially settled into the cabin as though they were rightful owners. Their clothes hung in my closets, their photos were framed on my mantel, and their opinions filled every inch of air I breathed. My sanctuary had become a stage for their entitlement. It began with the pantry. One morning, I went to grab my jar of homemade strawberry jam, the one I made every summer from the wild berries Warren and I used to pick, and found the shelves reorganized. My preserves were shoved into the corner, replaced by rows of store-bought condiments. Martha stood behind me, smiling tightly. "Oh, I hope you don't mind," she said. "Your system was a bit cluttered. I've made it more efficient." I wanted to scream, but instead I nodded and walked away. A few days later, I caught her going through my drawers in the hallway. When I asked what she was doing, she held up a small box of family photos. "I was just tidying up," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "You have so many pictures of your husband, I thought maybe you'd want to store some away. Must be painful to look at them every day." My hands trembled as I took the box from her. "You don't get to decide that," I said quietly. Dean wasn't much better. He treated the living room like a workshop. Tools scattered across the coffee table, sawdust collecting on my rug. I once came home to find him drilling something into the wall without asking. "Just hanging a better hook for your coat," he said. "You're welcome." Every invasion, every little favor, chipped away at my patience. But Trent, he was the root of it all. He encouraged their behavior, disguising manipulation as family bonding. "Mom just likes to help," he'd say whenever I confronted him. "You should appreciate it." When I mentioned feeling uncomfortable, he laughed and said, "Denise, you're too attached to this place. It's time you let others make it feel more alive." That's when I realized he wasn't just inconsiderate, he was calculated. Everything he did was part of a plan to push me out emotionally before doing it physically. I found myself retreating to my secret room more and more. Sometimes, I'd slip inside late at night just to breathe without feeling watched. From the small peephole hidden in the wall vent, I could observe the living room in silence. I watched Martha criticize Ella's cooking. I watched Dean snore loudly in my recliner, feet on the coffee table. I watched Trent lean back, smirking, drinking a beer like he owned the world. One night, as I sat in the darkness of my secret room, I overheard Trent talking to his parents. His voice carried easily through the thin wall. "Give it a few weeks," he said confidently. "Once she gets tired of the noise and changes, she'll move out on her own. Then the place is ours." I froze. My chest tightened so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. I had suspected it, but hearing it out loud, in his own words, shattered something inside me. Martha's voice followed, dripping with satisfaction. "It's for the best. This cabin has potential, but it needs a younger touch." Dean chuckled. "Poor woman probably can't handle the stress anymore." They all laughed. I sat there in silence, staring at the wall, my hands shaking in my lap. I had built this room to protect my belongings, but in that moment, I realized it would need to protect something far greater: my dignity. Over the next few days, I stopped confronting them. I smiled politely when they criticized me. I nodded when they made decisions about our home. I played the part of the quiet, harmless woman they believed I was. Let them think I was weak. Let them underestimate me. Ella noticed the shift. One morning she asked, "Mom, are you okay? You've been so quiet lately." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired." But she didn't look convinced. I wanted to tell her everything about the room, the plan, the recordings, but I couldn't yet. Not until I knew she was ready to see her husband for what he truly was. I began keeping my most precious things inside the secret room full-time. Each night, I'd lock myself inside for an hour or two, just thinking, planning. The room had become my brain's heartbeat, the only place where my thoughts could breathe freely. Then came the final straw. I walked into my bedroom one afternoon and found the closet door wide open. Inside, half my clothes had been shoved into boxes. Dean was standing there with a roll of tape. "What are you doing?" I demanded. He looked at me casually. "Trent thought we could use this room for storage. You don't really need this much space, do you?" I could barely see straight. "Get out," I said. "Now, don't get all worked up," he replied, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "We're just making room for everyone." I walked right past him, opened the closet, and started pulling my clothes back out one by one. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "No one touches my things again." He muttered something under his breath and left. But the damage was done. That night, I sat in my secret room, replaying everything I'd heard and seen. Trent's arrogance, Martha's condescension, Dean's disrespect, all of it echoing inside me until I could barely breathe. I realized then that my creation, this hidden space, wasn't just a sanctuary. It was a weapon, and I was done waiting for them to push me out. The quiet part of me, the teacher, the nurturer, the mother, was gone. What replaced her was something sharper, colder, and far more patient. That's when I decided the secret room wouldn't just be for hiding, it would be for teaching a lesson. Every great plan needs patience. Mine needed precision. After that day in the closet, something inside me shifted for good. The fear that had been quietly gnawing at me turned into focus, sharp and steady. I stopped reacting. I stopped arguing. From that moment forward, I became invisible to them in all the right ways. They saw only what I wanted them to see, an aging, tired woman losing control of her home and her mind. I played the role perfectly. I'd wander the house in my robe, muttering about forgetting things. I'd misplace items on purpose and let Trent find them, shaking his head as if he pitied me. Once, I forgot to turn off the stove. I made sure he caught it just in time. "You really need to be careful, Denise," he said, his voice laced with false concern. "This place can't handle your accidents." I apologized softly, pretending to be ashamed. While inside, I smiled. Every slip made him bolder. Every act of weakness made him careless. I needed him to feel completely in control before I could take it away. In my secret room, I began collecting everything I'd need. I installed a few small cameras around the cabin, nothing fancy, just discreet ones I could monitor through my tablet. One in the living room vent, one behind a decorative frame in the kitchen, and one hidden near the porch. They were so well placed that no one would ever notice. I wanted eyes on every moment of their arrogance. I started moving valuables into the secret room, not just jewelry and heirlooms, but important documents too. The cabin's deed, the insurance papers, even the small savings I had tucked away in the hall cabinet. I replaced the originals in the drawer with old receipts and blank folders. It took days to organize everything, but by the end, the hidden room had become my real home. The cabin above it was just a stage. Ella noticed my quiet movements. "Mom, you've been staying up late a lot," she said one evening. "Are you sure you're sleeping okay?" I looked at her tired face, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly when she poured her tea. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said softly. "Some things are easier to do when the house is quiet." She smiled weakly, not knowing that my words carried a deeper meaning. Meanwhile, Trent began growing arrogant beyond measure. He'd make jokes at my expense during dinner. "Mom's thinking of moving somewhere warmer," he'd say with a smirk. "Maybe we can finally start renovating when she does." His parents would chuckle. Ella would lower her gaze. And I would simply smile, nodding like I agreed. One evening, I heard him talking on the phone in the living room. He didn't know I was listening from the laundry hallway. "Yeah, man," he laughed. "It's just a matter of time. Once Denise gets tired of the noise and confusion, she'll move out, and the place is basically ours. Old people don't fight back, they fade." I recorded every word. The cameras caught him snooping too. Twice he tried opening the cabinet where the paperwork had once been. He frowned when he found nothing useful. I could see the frustration on his face. It was delicious. I started locking the secret room every time I left it, the latch clicking softly like a secret promise. Victor had shown me how to secure it from the inside, but I'd made an adjustment of my own, a secondary lock wired to a switch in the hall, hidden under the laundry detergent shelf. If I flipped it, no one could open the door from the outside. I was prepared for anything. But revenge wasn't just about security, it was about exposure. I wanted Trent and his parents to destroy themselves with their own arrogance. So, I fed it. I began leaving small temptations. I placed a jewelry box with costume pieces on my nightstand, half open. Within days, I noticed one of the necklaces missing and then saw Martha wearing it at breakfast, pretending it was hers. I didn't say a word. Instead, I smiled and took a photo when she wasn't looking. I left a few old checkbooks in the kitchen drawer, all canceled accounts. The next week, I found them in Dean's workshop bag. I photographed that too. Every theft, every insult, every act of manipulation, I documented it meticulously. Trent's confidence grew to the point of recklessness. He started speaking openly about their cabin to his friends, even boasting that he'd be putting in a new deck once the paperwork's done. I smiled every time he said it, knowing that the only papers he'd be signing soon were the ones sealing his downfall. Ella was the only part of the plan that gave me pause. She didn't deserve what was coming, she was just trapped. So, I decided to spare her from the details until the right moment. I'd show her proof, not words. She needed to see the truth to finally let go of him. The final piece of my setup was emotional. I had to make Trent think he'd won completely. So, one evening, I brought up the idea of downsizing. I said I'd been thinking about selling the cabin and moving to a smaller place in town. His eyes lit up instantly, and his parents exchanged excited looks. "Really?" he said, pretending to sound supportive. "That's actually a great idea, Denise. You'd be more comfortable, and we could take care of things here." I nodded, smiling sweetly. "Yes, dear, I think it's time." That night, as I sat inside my hidden room watching the live camera feed of their celebration, Martha opening a bottle of wine, Dean laughing, Trent kissing Ella on the cheek as if he hadn't already betrayed her, I felt nothing but quiet satisfaction. They had no idea what was coming. I turned off the screen, leaned back on my cot, and whispered into the still air, "You wanted to own this house, Trent? Soon, you'll wish you'd never stepped inside it." Because when the day came, I wanted their downfall to be undeniable. It all exploded over something as small as a dinner plate. The thing about living with predators is they rarely roar until they're sure you've already bled enough to be quiet. For 2 weeks I'd watched them chip away at my life with tiny polite invasions. The anger had been a slow burn. The night it all blew up, I was setting the table for a simple meal: mashed potatoes, roast chicken, the kind of comfort food Warren taught me to cook when the world felt heavy. The placemats were the ones Warren had embroidered years ago. I had arranged the candles. I had set out the good plates because for some reason I still believed, absurdly, that family dinners could soothe savage things. Martha reached across the table and knocked one of the plates. It slid off the placemat and cracked against the floor in a high, thin sound that made me freeze mid-breath. "Oh my goodness, Denise," she said with a practiced gasp, bending to pick up the shards as if they were precious. "I'm so clumsy." Trent chuckled. "It's okay, Mom. Accidents happen." The crack ran across the porcelain like a seam in my patience, but it wasn't the plate that set me off. It was the way Martha's eyes lingered on the framed photograph of Warren beside the mantel, and how she muttered, "So many reminders of the past." That tone perfunctory, clinical, as if memories were dust to be swept away, made something cold settle in my chest. I told myself to stay calm. I told myself this was the part of the script I'd written: allow them to think they'd won, wait until they were careless. So I smiled and helped her pick up the pieces, tucking the larger shards into a napkin with steady fingers. Trent said, "Maybe she should let us help more with the house." And Dean added, "If Denise feels overwhelmed, we can always look for assisted living options." There it was, the thinly veiled eviction notice. Wrapped in concern. Ella's face crumpled. She blinked back tears and murmured, "Dad never would have." And stopped, because Trent's jaw tightened like a trap. I felt my skin buzz with hot anger and then, just as quickly, a cool clarity. I excused myself to the kitchen under the pretense of fetching more wine and slipped into the laundry room doorway, pressed the hidden latch, and walked into the dim hush of my secret room. I sat on the small cot and closed my eyes, letting the muffled din of their voices seep through the walls like distant rain. The plan I'd been threading together for weeks snapped into perfect focus. I would not be the woman who vanished quietly. I would make them reveal themselves in words, in deeds, and on camera. For 3 days, I stayed in that room for hours at a time, emerging only when the house was empty or when I needed to perform my feigned frailty. I watched the footage back on the tablet until my eyes hurt. Trent coaxing Ella into letting go, Martha smoothing her hands over Warren's armchair like she was staking a claim, Dean riffling through drawers my hands had packed with care. Each clip was a small red pin on the map of betrayal. On the second night, I heard them plan in the living room, voices low and horridly intimate. "We'll start paperwork tomorrow," Trent said. "Insurance, title transfers, nothing they'll see coming." Martha giggled with a sound like a saw scraping wood. "We'll be settled by summer." I leaned my forehead against the cool wall and felt an odd calm. The cameras had captured everything. The deeds were safe in my small safe inside the hidden room. The bank accounts I'd quietly secured were untouched. My evidence was tidy, incontrovertible, and ready. The next afternoon, The breaking point came when Dean, trying to be helpful, took it upon himself to sort Warren's tools in the shed. He dragged out a battered metal box that Warren had kept under lock and filled it with Warren's old fishing lures, the ones carved by hand and painted in chipped greens. Dean tossed them carelessly onto a crate and laughed. "Who even uses these anymore?" I had been outside, tending the rosemary, when I heard the clatter. Something inside me snapped so sharply it felt like glass. I charged toward the shed, my voice unsteady but loud enough to stop them. "Those are Warren's," I said. Dean looked up with that bored smirk. "We're clearing out stuff that's not useful." "You should be grateful, Denise." I walked straight to the crate, fingernails digging into the painted wood, and felt the heat of memory flood me. I don't know if it was the smell of oil on the lures or the weight of history. I know only that I could not let them desecrate what Warren and I had built. I spoke slowly, each word a small hammer. "You will not touch his things." Trent rose from his chair, face pale. "Mom, she's being dramatic," he said. "This isn't necessary." Martha placed herself in front of Dean as if she were shielding him from a scolding child. Then Dean, in a testy, ugly voice that surprised even me, said, "Maybe you should just leave, Denise. You're making things difficult." There it was, the ultimatum spoken aloud. The family drew back into a tight defensive knot, and Ella's shoulders shook with a sob that sounded like surrender. I looked at her, really looked, and something that had been dormant for years, a teacher's certainty, a mother's backbone, organized itself into an edge. I left the shed with the lures cupped against my chest and walked back to the kitchen, set them on the counter where everyone could see, and said, "If you think you can push me out with niceties and cheap pity, you're wrong." My voice was small but steady, and the silence that followed was loud enough to hurt. Trent opened his mouth to respond and then closed it, the smirk gone. They began to argue among themselves, the first cracks in their united front appearing like lightning over a summer field. Ella pleaded for calm. Trent raised his voice. Accusations flew, soft at first and then sharp. In the middle of it all, I felt oddly detached and absolutely fierce. I excused myself, claiming I needed air, and slipped back into my hiding place, heart pounding. I watched them through the camera feed as the argument escalated and then, like a contagion, turned towards something worse, blaming each other for being the cause of the household's unrest, exposing secrets I hadn't known they'd kept. I had suspected it, but hearing it out loud, in his own words, shattered something inside me. I never knew silence could be such a powerful weapon. For years, as a teacher, I'd learned that silence in a classroom could command more attention than shouting ever could. Now, sitting in my secret room with the cameras streaming live, I realized that lesson applied just as well to the chaos unfolding above me. My absence had become a ghost in the house, one they couldn't explain or control. It began the morning after our confrontation in the shed. I didn't come out of my room. I stayed hidden behind the wall, the soft hum of the ventilation masking the faint noises from upstairs. From the cameras, I watched them wander the cabin in confusion. They called my name, at first gently, then with impatience, and finally with thinly veiled irritation. Trent checked the porch, muttering that I must have gone for a walk. Martha stood by the kitchen counter, sighing dramatically. "She's probably sulking. Some people just can't handle sharing." Dean, as always, tried to sound practical. "She'll come back when she's hungry." But as hours passed, the mood shifted. Ella started to panic. She knocked on my bedroom door, called my phone, checked the garden, and even the woods behind the house. Her voice cracked as she shouted, "Mom, please, just answer me." Watching her like that, terrified, confused, nearly broke me. But I couldn't reveal myself yet. The plan needed time to fester. Trent had to feel the loss of control. Martha had to feel the absence of someone to scold. Dean had to feel the weight of his own arrogance. By evening, I could see the worry turning into tension. The dinner table sat untouched. Martha paced. Dean kept glancing at his son for reassurance, but Trent's facade was slipping. He'd underestimated me. He hadn't expected that I might choose silence over submission. "Maybe she went into town," Ella said weakly. "She's never stayed away this long without telling me." Trent's reply was cold. She's probably doing this to make us feel guilty. She'll come crawling back when she realizes she has nowhere else to go. I smiled bitterly in the dark. If only he knew how close I was, just a few inches behind the very wall he leaned on when he said those words. Over the next 2 days, panic began to bloom in that house like mold. Ella barely slept, pacing from room to room, her hair unbrushed and eyes red from crying. She called the local police, reporting me as missing. I heard the officer's voice faintly through the window as he questioned Trent and his parents. Trent acted perfectly calm, telling them I'd been confused lately and probably wandered off. The officer left with a promise to check nearby trails. Once the door closed, Martha turned on her son. "You said she'd leave quietly, not disappear. What if she did something drastic?" Trent snapped. "Don't start, Mom. She's fine. She just wants attention." But he didn't sound sure. He rubbed his temples, pacing the living room while Ella sobbed quietly on the couch. Dean sat by the window, watching the road like a man waiting for a ghost. That night, I barely slept. I watched them through the cameras, each of them unraveling in their own way. Martha cleaned obsessively, muttering about ungrateful people. Dean sat on the porch, drinking beer after beer until his words slurred. Trent kept trying to call Ella's phone from his own, checking texts, checking email, his mind clearly running wild with the possibility that something had gone terribly wrong. I wanted to feel pity, but the truth was, I felt satisfaction, deep, unapologetic satisfaction. They had filled my home with their noise, their lies, their entitlement. Now, in my absence, all that noise turned inward. On the third night, I saw something unexpected. Ella sat alone at the dining table, staring blankly at the cracked plate from the night of our argument. She whispered something I couldn't hear at first, then leaned forward, her voice trembling. "You were right, Mom," she said softly. "He's changed. I don't even recognize him anymore." I covered my mouth with my hand, tears stinging my eyes. She was finally starting to see it. Meanwhile, Trent's composure continued to crumble. He snapped at his parents, shouting, "If she's gone, fine. This place is still ours." Martha gasped, offended by his tone. "Don't speak like that in front of your father." Dean muttered, "Maybe this wasn't such a good idea, son." Trent slammed his fist against the wall, the very wall that separated him from me, and stormed out of the room. Inside my hiding place, I could feel the vibration of the impact ripple through the wood. For a fleeting moment, I imagined him breaking through and discovering me, but I knew he wouldn't. The door was seamless, the wall was thick, my secret was safe. I stayed there, silent, recording everything, every outburst, every crack in their unity, every moment of blame and fear. The footage showed them for who they truly were: greedy, cruel, selfish. But Ella's worry pierced me more deeply than any of their malice. On the fourth day, I decided it was time to end their confusion. But I wouldn't just walk out. No, I wanted the truth to unfold in a way that couldn't be twisted or denied. They needed to see themselves the way I saw them. Before dawn, I organized the recordings, saved them onto a drive, and tucked it into my pocket. I waited until the house stirred awake until I heard Martha's familiar complaints, Dean's cough, and Trent's heavy footsteps. Then I pressed my hand to the hidden latch, steadying my breath. It was time. I stepped forward, ready to let my silence speak one last time, not with words, but with proof. The longer they stayed confused, the more power I regained. On the fourth day, Ella found the first clue. I was sitting quietly in my secret room, watching the morning unfold through the camera feed. The cabin was eerily silent. Martha sat by the window knitting, though her hands trembled too much to keep a steady rhythm. Dean was pacing near the porch, mumbling about getting out of here. Trent looked like a storm barely holding itself together, jaw tight, eyes darting at every creak of the floorboards. Then I saw her. My Ella. My sweet, gentle daughter, creeping into the laundry room like a ghost, searching for something she couldn't name. Her hair was messy, eyes swollen from crying. She looked exhausted, but determined. She stood there for a long while, staring at the walls. I could almost see her thoughts racing. Maybe she noticed the strange way the paneling didn't quite match. Maybe she caught the faint outline of the seam. Whatever it was, something drew her to that exact spot to me. She ran her fingers along the surface, pressing here and there, her brow furrowed. Then she whispered, "Mom?" My heart lurched. I hesitated. Breath caught in my throat. I hadn't planned to reveal myself yet, but hearing her voice raw, trembling, hopeful, broke through every barrier I'd built. I leaned close to the small vent and whispered back, "Ella." She froze. Her head jerked toward the wall, eyes wide. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Mom? Where are you?" I pressed my lips close to the vent. "Behind the wall, sweetheart, but you can't tell anyone yet." For a moment, she just stared in disbelief. Then tears welled in her eyes. "You're alive," she said, half laughing, half crying. "They thought you were gone, we all thought." "I know," I said gently. "But listen to me, I need you to stay calm. There's something you have to see first." I unlocked the hidden latch and opened the door just wide enough for her to slip inside. When she stepped in and saw the small cot, the shelves, the light, everything, her breath caught. "Mom, what is this?" "It's my safety," I said quietly. "And soon. It's our proof." She looked at me like she was trying to understand, but part of her already knew. "You've been watching them," she said. I nodded and handed her the tablet. "Watch." She hesitated, then pressed play. The first video showed Trent standing in the living room, arms crossed, telling his parents how he planned to take over the place once I was out of the way. Ella's hand flew to her mouth. She clicked through clip after clip, Martha mocking me, Dean laughing, Trent speaking with that cold, calculating confidence. Every minute drained the color from her face. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would he do this?" "Because he thought he could," I said. "Because people like him only understand power when it's taken away." She wiped her tears roughly. "I should have seen it. I should have stopped him." I touched her hand. "You couldn't have. You loved him. Love makes fools of even the best of us." We sat there for a while, the silence heavy but cleansing. Then I opened the small safe and pulled out the folder with the deed, my records, and a small stack of photos. "Everything I've built, everything he wanted to take is in here. And now, you and I are going to make sure he never gets near it again." She looked at me, her expression hardening. "What do we do?" I smiled faintly. "We wait for the right moment." That afternoon, Ella went back upstairs. She played her part well, tired, subdued, just as they expected. She cooked a dinner, answered questions, and even laughed when Trent cracked one of his empty jokes. But every time their eyes turned away, she looked toward the laundry room with a small, secret fire in her gaze. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, she came back to me. We sat together in the hidden room, whispering plans. "He thinks you're weak," she said quietly. "We can use that." "We will," I replied. I explained the next step. We'd let them keep digging their own hole. I'd feed them the illusion that I was ready to surrender the cabin that I wanted to transfer ownership to Trent as part of my supposed move. But instead of transfer documents, he'd be signing a confession. A legal statement admitting to manipulation, coercion, and attempted fraud, disguised as a temporary title authorization. It was perfectly legal, meticulously worded, and backed by every recording we had. Ella stared at me with awe. "You thought of everything." "I had time," I said simply. They gave me that time. The next morning, she pretended to find a note I'd left behind, something I'd written earlier and placed where she'd find it easily. It said, "I'm safe. Don't worry. Trust no one but what you see." That little piece of paper changed everything. When she showed it to Trent, he acted relieved, almost smug. "See?" he told his parents. "She's fine. Probably went to her sister's. We can finally breathe now." They believed it. They truly thought they'd won. As they laughed, Ella stood by the sink, her hand brushing against her wedding ring. I saw the exact moment her expression changed, that quiet, trembling love she'd once had for him curdled into disgust. She turned slightly toward the hallway, knowing I was watching from the peephole, and nodded. It was time. The next phase of my plan was set in motion. Soon, Trent would have everything he wanted, or at least, he'd believe he did. And that belief would destroy him far more effectively than anger ever could. That night, as Ella returned to bed beside him, pretending to sleep, I sat in my secret room, surrounded by silence and the faint hum of vengeance brewing just beyond the wall. Together, we crafted the final act of their undoing. We staged my return as if nothing had happened. It was a crisp Friday morning, the kind that carried a deceptive calm, birds chirping outside, the smell of coffee wafting through the cabin, and the faintest trace of spring sunlight warming the windows. I waited until they were all seated for breakfast. My heart was steady, my breathing even. This was it. The trap was set, and all I had to do was walk into it like an actress returning to her stage. I stepped quietly out of the laundry room, brushed the dust from my sweater, and entered the kitchen. Martha was the first to see me. Her fork clattered against the plate, and for a second, no one moved. Trent froze mid-bite, his face draining of color. Ella gasped, playing her part perfectly, pressing a hand over her mouth. "Mom!" she cried, jumping up and wrapping her arms around me. "You're okay." I hugged her tightly, whispering, "It's time." Trent recovered quickly, forcing a shaky laugh. "Denise, we were worried sick. Where have you been?" I smiled politely, setting down my purse on the counter. "I just needed a little time away. Things have been crowded lately." Martha let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, you gave us all such a scare, dear." "Did I?" I asked softly, watching her squirm. The tension at that table was almost tangible. They were waiting for me to explode, to accuse them, to demand answers, but I did none of that. Instead, I smiled and sat down. "You know, I've been thinking about things while I was gone," I said calmly. "About my age, my health, and this cabin. I think it's time I start planning for the future." Trent leaned forward eagerly. "You mean selling the place?" I looked directly into his eyes. "Not selling. Transferring." He blinked, confused. "Transferring?" I nodded. "To you and Ella." "Of course. I think it's best that the cabin stays in the family." Martha gasped in delight. Dean grinned. "Well, that's a relief," he said, chuckling. "You're making the right decision, Denise." Ella shot me a subtle glance, our silent signal. She knew exactly what I was doing. I opened my purse and pulled out a neat folder of papers. "I took the liberty of having everything drawn up," I said, sliding the documents across the table toward Trent. "All it needs is your signature to make things official." He picked them up, eyes lighting up as he skimmed the pages. He didn't understand what he was reading, not really. The title page looked legitimate, the legal phrasing professional. But hidden within the language was a carefully worded trap, a written admission of coercion, manipulation, and unlawful interference in property ownership. Once signed, it would be enough to implicate him in fraud and elder abuse. He grinned broadly, utterly fooled. "Wow, Denise, this is really generous of you." "Oh, it's nothing," I said, keeping my tone even. "After all, family is about sharing, isn't it?" That line hit him exactly the way I wanted it to. His smile faltered for a moment, a flicker of confusion, of recognition, but his arrogance overpowered it. He signed the papers with a flourish, then handed them back to me. "There," he said smugly. "Official." I slipped the documents back into the folder and smiled. "Perfect. Thank you, Trent. That makes everything easier." Martha was still gushing. "This is so wonderful. We'll finally make some real improvements around here." Ella stood by the window, her face pale but composed. I saw her hand twitch as she resisted the urge to laugh, not from humor, but from the sheer, wicked satisfaction of seeing justice in motion. Trent leaned back in his chair, the king of a castle that was never his. "You'll see, Denise," he said. "We'll take great care of this place." I met his gaze, my smile never wavering. "Oh, I know you will. I'll make sure of it." That afternoon, Ella and I went into town to run errands. In reality, we went straight to my lawyer's office. I handed him the signed confession and the USB drive containing the footage from the cameras. He read the first page, then looked up at me, eyes wide. "You understand what this means?" he said. "I do," I replied, "and I want everything filed and ready quietly." He nodded. "You've got them, Denise. They won't see this coming." When we returned to the cabin, Martha and Dean were rearranging my living room again, humming cheerfully. Trent was outside on the porch, talking on the phone, probably boasting about his new ownership. I stood in the doorway, watching him with a strange, peaceful calm. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and he didn't even know it. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the fire. The house was quiet, too quiet. But it wasn't the silence of defeat anymore. It was the calm before truth. Ella joined me, sitting cross-legged on the floor. "So it's done?" she whispered. "Yes," I said, nodding. "He gave me everything I needed." She exhaled slowly. "It's strange. I should feel scared. But I don't. That's because you finally see them for who they are," I said. We sat in silence, the fire crackling between us. For the first time in months, the cabin didn't feel like a prison. It felt like justice, patient, deliberate, and about to bloom. And with that, the trap officially closed. The next morning, I invited everyone for a family breakfast. The sun broke through the fog that day, slicing across the kitchen in long golden lines. It felt almost symbolic, light finally spilling into the darkest corners of my home. I'd set the table neatly, made pancakes and coffee, and even laid out fresh fruit. The smell of cinnamon and maple filled the air, masking the tension that simmered just beneath it. Martha came downstairs first, humming cheerfully. "You're in a good mood this morning, Denise," she said, taking a seat and smoothing her napkin across her lap. Dean followed, nodding approvingly at the spread. "Now this is what a family breakfast should look like." Then Trent came down, his voice booming. "I hope this means we're finally moving forward." I smiled, pouring coffee into his mug. "Oh yes," I said. "We're definitely moving forward." Ella sat quietly across from me, eyes flicking between all of us. She knew what was coming, but her composure was steady, calm, controlled, almost cold. I had never been prouder of her than I was in that moment. Once everyone had their plates filled and their coffee poured, I stood up. "Before we eat," I said, "I have one final announcement." Trent raised an eyebrow, fork midair. "An announcement?" "Yes," I replied, moving toward the old TV that sat against the far wall. "I think it's time we clear the air as a family." I clicked the remote. The TV flickered to life, the sound faint at first. The first image appeared Trent in the living room, pacing with a beer in hand, telling his parents that I was old, stubborn, and easy to manipulate. The next clip showed Martha and Dean laughing as they talked about taking over the cabin. Silence. Trent's fork fell against his plate with a sharp clang. "What the hell is this?" he barked. I folded my arms. "Proof," I said simply. "Proof of every lie, every insult, every plan to push me out of my own home." The next video rolled. It showed Dean rifling through my drawers, Martha mocking my cooking, and Trent calm, collected, telling Ella that, once I was gone, everything would finally belong to them. Martha's face went pale. Dean tried to speak, but his voice failed him. Trent stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "Turn that off," he demanded. I didn't move. "No," I said. "You're going to watch. All of you." Ella looked directly at him, tears in her eyes but fury in her voice. "You lied to me, Trent. You lied about everything," he stammered, trying to regain control. "Ella, listen, she's twisting things. You don't know what you're seeing." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm seeing," she snapped. "I'm seeing the man I married destroy everything he touched." Martha rose from her chair, pointing at me with shaking hands. "You had no right to record us. That's illegal." I smiled faintly. "Actually, it's not when it's in my own home." I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder, the one Trent had signed the day before. "And since we're talking about legality, here's something else." I slid the papers across the table. "That's your confession, Trent. Every signature right there in your own handwriting." He grabbed the pages, scanning them quickly, his face twisting in confusion, then horror. What is this? It's what you agreed to when you signed my transfer papers, I said softly. A full admission of coercion, manipulation, and attempted property fraud. Congratulations, you just confessed to everything on record. For a moment, no one breathed. The only sound was the faint buzz of the TV in the background, looping another clip of him calling me a gullible old woman. Dean slammed his palm on the table. You tricked him. No, I said, meeting his glare. He tricked himself. You all did. Ella stood now, her voice trembling but strong. You don't get to live here anymore. You don't get to touch anything my mother built. You're done, Trent. Trent's eyes darted between us, desperate. You can't do this to me. You can't take everything. I leaned forward, my voice low and final. You took my peace, my home, and my daughter's trust. Now I'm just returning the favor. Martha started gathering her things in a panic. Dean, get the bags. We're leaving. He hesitated, glancing at his son. But when Trent didn't move, he stood and began stuffing clothes into a duffel bag. Martha followed, muttering curses under her breath. Trent stayed seated, staring at me with disbelief. You planned all this, he said quietly. Yes, I answered. Every moment of it. He let out a bitter laugh. You think you've won? I don't need to win, I said. I just needed you to lose. I pointed to the door. You have 1 hour to get off my property before I call the police. And believe me, I have everything they'll need. He glared at me for a long time, jaw clenched, but then he saw the determination in Ella's face and something inside him broke. Without another word, he stormed toward the door. Outside, the crunch of gravel beneath their car tires was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I stood at the window, watching their silver SUV disappear down the road, shrinking into a blur between the trees. The silence that followed was immense, heavy, beautiful, pure. I could finally breathe. The air in the cabin felt lighter, the walls seemed to hum with relief. Ella turned to me, tears streaming down her cheeks. It's over, she whispered. I nodded, pulling her into my arms. Yes, sweetheart, I said softly. It's finally over. The fire crackled behind us, warm and steady. The home that had once felt invaded now felt alive again, cleansed. For the first time in months, the only sounds were the ones that belonged here, the whisper of wind through the trees, the soft tick of the old clock on the wall, and our quiet, steady breathing. When their car finally Finchons of Parapezes disappeared down the road, I felt the cabin breathe again. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. After they left, the air inside the cabin felt new, like a storm had finally passed and the world was breathing again. For the first time in months, there were no footsteps echoing down the hallway. No forced laughter. No murmurs of criticism from Martha or the heavy thud of Dean's boots. Just peace. Quiet, precious peace. Ella and I stood in the center of the living room for a long time, neither of us speaking. The morning light spilled through the window, soft and gold, touching the wooden floorboards my husband had sanded by hand. I reached out, brushed my fingertips along the frame of Warren's old armchair, and whispered, "It's ours again." Ella smiled faintly, her eyes red from crying but brighter than I'd seen them in months. "You did it, Mom," she said. "You really did it." "No," I told her. "We did it." That day, we opened every window in the cabin and let the wind sweep through, carrying away the last traces of their presence. We stripped the bedsheets, scrubbed the kitchen counters, and packed away everything that wasn't ours. The house smelled of lemon soap and pine when we were done, clean, light, alive. When we took a break, I made us tea and we sat on the porch. The forest around us was silent except for the birds singing like they'd been waiting for this day too. Ella looked out at the trees, her face calm but thoughtful. "I can't believe how much I let him control me," she said softly. "It's like I didn't even notice until it was too late." I put my hand over hers. "You loved him, you trusted him. That's not weakness, Ella. It's what good people do. The mistake isn't love, it's giving it to someone who doesn't deserve it." She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I think I was more afraid of being alone than of being unhappy. Then, You've learned the most important lesson, I said. Peace is worth more than companionship. Over the next few weeks, we began rebuilding not just the house, but ourselves. I called a locksmith and changed every lock. We installed new security cameras, not because I feared their return, but because I refused to ever feel vulnerable in my own home again. The new locks clicked into place like punctuation marks in a story finally complete. Ella helped me rearrange the furniture, returning every piece to where it belonged. We burned Martha's tablecloth and threw away Dean's tools. The ashes from that fire rose into the twilight, carried off by the wind like ghosts being exorcised. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ella and I sat by the fireplace, sorting through the boxes I had hidden in my secret room. Inside were all the things that had survived their invasion. Warren's letters, my journals, old photographs, the fishing lures Dean had nearly thrown away. We spread them out across the coffee table like pieces of history reclaimed. I never knew you kept so many things, Ella said, smiling softly as she held one of the wooden lures in her hand. Your father made these when we first moved here, I said. He used to say each one had a story that the fish didn't bite because of the color, but because of the patience behind it. She laughed quietly. Sounds like him. We stayed up late that night, talking about Warren, about the past, about the future. The cabin, once filled with tension and deceit, now echoed with laughter again. The sound was healing fragile at first, but real. In the weeks that followed, Ella filed for divorce. She told me one morning over coffee, her voice firm and resolute. I can't go back, Mom. Not after everything. I nodded, proud but protective. You shouldn't, I said. And you won't have to. You have me. And you have your peace. The process was surprisingly swift. The evidence, the signed confession, the recordings, and the lawyer's documentation left no room for Trent to fight back. Ella walked away with her freedom, her dignity, and half of what they'd built together. He tried reaching out once, a text that simply read, "You ruined everything." She didn't respond. After her divorce finalized, Ella moved back into the cabin for a while. We redecorated together, painting the walls a soft cream color, replacing the old curtains with bright linen ones. Each brushstroke felt symbolic, a small restoration of what had been stolen. I found comfort in my secret room, though I no longer used it for hiding. Sometimes I'd go inside just to think, to remember what it felt like to build something powerful from fear. It wasn't just a secret anymore, it was a monument, proof that I hadn't been powerless. One evening, I told Ella I was thinking about transforming the room. It shouldn't stay a bunker, I said. It should mean something better now. She smiled. What will you make it? I don't know yet, I admitted, but something peaceful. We watched the fire together that night, the flames flickering gold against the logs. The world outside had finally quieted. There were no more hidden motives, no more manipulation, just the sound of the forest and the heartbeat of our home returning to life. Ella leaned her head on my shoulder. You know, she said softly, Dad would have been proud of you. A lump rose in my throat, but I smiled. Maybe. But I think he'd be prouder of you. We sat there for a long time, the kind of silence that didn't demand to be filled. For the first time in so long, I wasn't waiting for something bad to happen. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was home, truly home, with my daughter beside me, and the ghosts of the past finally at rest. But I still had one final thing left to do. A year later, I turned the secret room into a small library. What was once a hidden refuge built out of fear became a place of quiet reflection. The walls that had once muffled my breathing now held shelves lined with books, stories of strength, survival, and renewal. I painted the walls a soft sage green, the same color Warren had chosen for our first bedroom decades ago. On the back wall, above the doorway, I hung a small wooden sign carved by a local craftsman. It read, "Peace is earned." Every time I stepped inside, I felt the truth of those words. The cabin had changed since that storm of deceit. It looked brighter, now lighter. The air carried warmth instead of tension. I'd planted new flowers around the porch, the kind Warren used to love. Daisies, hydrangeas, and wild lavender. The scent drifted through the open windows every morning, reminding me that healing isn't loud or quick, it's steady and quiet, like the growth of roots beneath soil. Ella visited often. She'd moved into a small apartment in town, working as an art teacher now, something she'd always wanted to do before life with Trent dimmed her spark. She'd stop by every weekend, sometimes bringing pastries, sometimes just her laughter. Her laughter filled every corner of the cabin, and each time she walked through the door, I felt a sense of gratitude so deep it almost hurt. One afternoon, while she was visiting, she noticed the transformation of the secret room. "It's beautiful," she said softly, running her hand along the spines of the books. "I can't believe this is where you hid all that time." I smiled, resting my hand on the doorway. "It's strange, isn't it? This place was born from fear, but now it's where I find peace." She looked at me, her expression tender. "You turned pain into purpose, Mom. That's what you do." I chuckled quietly. Maybe that's the teacher in me. I always believed in lessons, even the hard ones. After she left that evening, I brewed a cup of chamomile tea and sat inside the library, surrounded by silence. The chair I sat in was an old one, the same one Dean had once claimed as his. I'd reupholstered it myself, turning what had been a symbol of intrusion into something comfortable again. The past didn't haunt me anymore. It simply reminded me how far I'd come. Sometimes I still caught myself remembering the chaos, the shouting, the lies, the fear of losing everything. But instead of pain, those memories now carried a strange peace. They were proof that I had survived, that I had reclaimed what was mine. I never heard from Trent or his parents again. Word around town was that they'd moved out of state not long after the divorce, chasing new opportunities that never quite worked out. I didn't need to know the details. Their absence was the closure I needed. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the trees in gold, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine and thought of Warren. The wind rustled through the branches, soft and familiar. I whispered, "You'd be proud of us, love. Ella's strong. I'm stronger. And this cabin, well, it's still standing." The silence that followed was warm and alive, as if he were listening. A few weeks later, Ella brought someone new to visit, a man named Peter. He was kind, patient, and gentle in the way he looked at her. Not as someone to control, but as someone to cherish. As they laughed together on the porch, I realized how different this laughter sounded: genuine, free, unburdened. Later that evening, when Ella and Peter had gone home, I walked into my little library and lit a candle. The flame flickered softly against the walls, casting long shadows across the books. I opened one of my journals, the one I'd written in while hiding in this very room, and reread my first entry. "They think I'm powerless. They're wrong." I smiled to myself. That woman, the frightened, quiet version of me, had no idea just how strong she was about to become. I wrote a new entry beneath it: "Peace reclaimed, home restored, lesson learned." I closed the journal and placed it back on the shelf. Before leaving the room, I paused in the doorway, fingers tracing the carved words above me. "Peace is earned." Warren had always said something similar. "You can't demand peace, Denise, you build it." I finally understood what he meant. Peace wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the victory of choosing calm over chaos, truth over manipulation, courage over fear. As I turned off the light, the cabin seemed to hum around me, not with secrets anymore, but with contentment. That night, I stepped outside one last time before bed. The sky was clear, sprinkled with stars. The forest, once a place of hiding and tension, now stood quiet and welcoming. I took a deep breath and let the cool air fill my lungs. This place, my home, had tested me, broken me, and rebuilt me. It had taught me that revenge isn't always destruction. Sometimes, it's rebuilding. Sometimes, it's the simple act of living well, while others fade into the consequences they created. I glanced back at the cabin, its windows glowing softly from the inside, and whispered a quiet goodbye to the version of myself who once hid in fear. She was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and free. I walked back inside, closing the door gently behind me. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, and the scent of lavender drifted through the air. I smiled, feeling an overwhelming calm settle deep within me. Because when someone tries to steal your peace, the best revenge is to make them watch you live in it.